I want to do a Bitcoin focused video today. I think I cracked the riddle of when we're going to see the acceleration really pick up in Bitcoin. I shared it with my group, so the FOMC kind of non-event was not a surprise to us. With this projection, I think we have a really good roadmap of when to expect things to really pick up. Of course, what that means for the TradFi proxies like MSTR and the Bitcoin miners, completely different story. But at least through the lens of when the rising tide kind of lifts together, I think we have a timeline on that. And I'm going to share it with you today as well in this video. First, I want to go back to 2017 and just show you what I see when I'm looking at like the run up to the real acceleration with 2017. So I think currently we are, I don't know, somewhere along the lines of maybe here in this range, just kind of chopping in terms of like trying to equate this to 2017. I think in October is when we're going to see the initial pop, and then we're going to see it kind of accelerate into November, where I think we're going to see a very similar analog to 2017, which is funny because if you remember my Bitcoin log chart, 2017, when it broke down after doing a fake breakout, what did it do? It backtested the 21 weekly EMA. What did we do this year? Same exact thing so far. But notice double wedges, okay? A minor wedge here that broke in October. I think we're going to see something very similar to that in 2025. And then likely, you know, it starts to accelerate, but we're going to see another wedge that likely breaks sometime in November and then really appreciate into the end of the year. Except I even expect a double move. Based on a lot of charts that I'm seeing, I expect a double move that extends into late Q1, even early Q2 2024. I keep coming up with the date April a lot on my charts. Okay, that was 2017. And I'm going to show you guys the projection in just a second. But now let's look at 2020 real quick. Things got real exciting right around the options expiration here. It was October 16th, 2020. So I know it's hard to see, but Bitcoin was at 11,000. Right after that, within just a few days, it was up 30%, and it broke above this big wedge. Okay, so the options expirations, I do tend to think that there's significance there. Whether you want to believe that Bitcoin cares about traditional finance things like options expirations or not, I do like to point them out if I feel that, you know, there was acceleration right afterwards. So I want to point that out. October options expiration broke above this wedge, and then, you know, it was off to the races here in 2020. And also, this was more of a longer sustained move, 163 days in total. And I think we see something like that, you know, and this is, you could even say 2020 was a double move. You know, it was. You got the move up, the move down, and then the move up again, except I think maybe the second move is going to be significantly higher into 2026 should it manifest. All right, now, why is there a fib retrace on the screen? Well, for one, just look. So what I did with this fib retrace is I normalized it at the 0 line, similar to what I did with MSTR. And that's how I realized in MSTR that both big moves in 2024 broke out from the 618 fib. Both moves, they're just on a different scale. Okay, so the 618 fib in early 2024 was a different price level than the late move, right? And then in 2025, I imagine it's going to do the exact same thing and probably launch from the 618 fib, which is at 341.5. Well, anyways, I did the same thing for Bitcoin here. And just stop for a second and look at how nicely it encapsulates price action going back to the 2021 November top. Pretty darn good, if you ask me. It even helps you identify the bottom here around 15, 16,000 in 2022. And then all the levels were kind of respected on the way up. Even this, you know, consolidation right here that it went to, essentially consolidated back to the 786 fib. Just a beautiful thing. Now, where are we now? Well, we're consolidating around the 1.618 fib right here. Okay, and what I expect ultimately is, initially I was like, I think we're just going to see a pullback to 112,000, maybe even today. But no, that would be too crazy, right? I think that maybe we just kill another month. So people that are in call options, etc., are going to feel another month of pain. But check this out. This is a projection. I cloned previous price action. I adjusted it for scale. First and foremost, I know there's a lot going on here, so I apologize. But look at the bull flag, okay? I think that we basically backtest the top of this bull flag at the end of September. And honestly, too, I've studied, you know, Septembers for Bitcoin. And I've noticed quite often that, like, if the first half is bearish, the second half might be bullish, and vice versa. So far in September, we've seen more or less a bullish September. So it wouldn't surprise me if the second half is bearish, ultimately with a backtest and a final wipeout of leverage down to 109,300-ish. Okay, that white channel is the bull flag that I think we've been in and then kind of broken out of a few times. I think we backtest the top of it would make a lot of sense. And then we're off to the races after that. Now, if I delete that real quick to make this easier to see, look at how I cloned this move. It's an inverted head and shoulders, another very bullish structure that would help propel us to where I think we're headed If I zoom all the way out, I'd say we're heading north of 200,000 for sure. Maybe even if we get the double move north of 300,000, who knows, even 4 is possible. Depending on, again, the longer it takes, the more sustained the move is, the higher we're going to go, essentially, is usually how it works. And that's how these charts work, because they're all expansion channels. You know what I mean? They're up and to the right. So over time, the top end of those channels that we use as projections, they're not an exact science, but they are pretty good and pretty reliable in the past, since they're based on previous price action, at least to give us a ballpark of how high we can go. Anyways, you can see the inverted head and shoulders here, right? Hopefully that's not too hard to see. And then also, what do you notice? Now, in the past, I had these lines white, so let's just make them white real quick. You guys see that? You also get a wedge. The one thing that I couldn't wrap my head around was, why don't I see a wedge if we are going to start the acceleration after, the September options expiration? Why doesn't it look like 2017 did? Why doesn't it look like 2020 does? Bitcoin doesn't owe us anything, but this has been something that's been on my mind literally since we first broke above, where was it? Like 116,000 back here. It was something that was on my mind the whole time, even though I was posting bullish videos and stuff for YouTube, and it's fun to do that. And the views were incredible. The sentiment was amazing, right? You guys all saw it in the comments and on Twitter and wherever else you go. But when that's the case, it's usually like, how often are we allowed to win when we're all feeling great about it together, when there's euphoria and the move hasn't even started to manifest yet, right? So what did we get? We got a flush. We got to, X out the sentiment, make it bad now. But look at this projection. Does this not make a whole lot of sense? You get the wedge, just like the previous time. So instead of me saying, hey guys, I'm the smartest person in the room, let me tell you why this time's going to be different, I'm saying, guys, it's not going to be different. You're going to get an inverted head and shoulders, extremely bullish, to propel us off of the 1618 fib, that's the blue line, and it's going to create this wedge structure that we saw in the past both times, that ultimately propels us. It squeezes price into that little corner and then propels the move upwards. Now, this is not the only chart I use for Bitcoin. This is why I love having multiple charts. It's not going to be a straight vertical line, but the next fib level that we would expect to get to is 181,300, which is the 2618, and that's just using this Fibonacci retracement. Of course, on other charts, there's different ways to get to different levels of significance, but given that we just spent, let's zoom in real quick so we get an accurate read here. Given that we just spent, how many days? Sorry. We basically just spent 80 days around the 1618 fib, and I'm saying, hey, we're going to spend a total of 105 days, basically. Also, it came into play right here, so if you want to count those 2 days as well, you're looking at around, 110 days around that fib level. Well, guess what? When we get up to 181,000 Bitcoin, I expect to see, it's not a guarantee, but I expect that we'll spend more time around that level. And honestly, before I wrap the video, why don't we just backtest this real quick? So here we're applying the same logic from the 2017 run to the 2020 run. So if we go to the 1618 fib, what do you notice? Well, we did spend quite a bit of time around it. I did measure, and the first time we got there, we only spent 32 days around it. And then the second time, how long did we spend? We spent 65. So actually do the math. It's right around 100 days, honestly, even though it was broken up. Either way. And then we ended up ultimately getting to the 2618 fib. That's the red line at about 51,600. We never made it up to the 3618 fib, which is the oh no, we did almost though. Actually, I mean, we fell a little bit shy. The 3618 was up at 71,300. And ultimately we got up to 69,000, maybe just for the memes and for the lulz. It was funnier to just stop at 69K, but we almost made it right up there. So again, just if we adjust for scale, and I'll wrap the video, if we get up to the 3618, we're talking about $250,600 Bitcoin. If you're irresponsibly long MSTR like I am, how much would it be worth to you to have somebody who's in the charts daily looking for the perfect entry for shares and options, and eventually looking to see if we might have topped and it's time to take profits? If this is something that interests you, I want to invite you to check out my MSTR Generational Wealth community linked below.